Okay, let's dive into this. Take a second and ask yourself a deceptively simple question. Do you actually know where you are right now? And, well, I don't just mean geographically. Sure, you might be sitting in your living room, commuting on a train, or maybe chilling at your desk. But do you know where you are existentially? In this explainer, we're going to look at the architecture of orientation. We're exploring how we as humans navigate belonging, movement, identity, and the great unknown. Because as it turns out, figuring out our coordinates on a map, that's really only a tiny fraction of what it means to truly find our way.
This explainer is going to act as our map today. We're traveling through 4 distinct stages. First, the architecture of orientation. Second, technology and the unknown. Third, borders, movement, and morality. And finally, the psychology of in-between. Let's get right to it.
Let's establish our baseline with Section 1, the architecture of orientation.
What's absolutely fascinating here is how this whole concept bridges the physical act of wayfinding with our absolute deepest human need to belong. You know, when we hear the word orientation, most of us just picture a compass pointing north. But there is a much, much larger theme here. Orientation is both the determination of geographical direction and the existential alignment of our identity. The hidden central question of human navigation is really asking what actually happens when we lose certainty about where we belong. We are constantly contrasting the physical act of moving around with the deeply psychological state of belonging.
And that brings us to Section 2, Technology and the Unknown.
So for thousands of years, navigation was a profoundly internal process. Ancient humans relied on this deep, almost instinctive awareness to navigate the world. We see this in incredible historical practices, like Inuit wayfinding through snow and ice, or Polynesian star mapping across vast open oceans. Doing that required immense personal skill and a totally intimate connection with the environment. But contrast that ancient wayfinding with how we do things today. Modern humans completely outsource our sense of direction to external devices. We rely heavily on GPS, algorithms, and screens to tell us where to go. The philosophical clash here is whether shifting navigation from an internal human skill to an external digital convenience is, well, actually weakening our human awareness.
Throughout history, there are these recurring motifs in how we conceptualize finding our way. First, maps. Maps represent knowledge, control, safety, and predictability. When we have a map in our hands, we feel secure because, frankly, humans fundamentally fear disorientation. But then we have the fog, which represents mystery and uncertainty, and oceans, which symbolize massive, completely unknown possibilities. Historically, maps were incomplete. The world contained a literal fog, and exploration inherently involved deep, scary uncertainty. Today, we've largely eradicated that fog with satellite imagery. But we really have to ask ourselves, did that fog, that terrifying but totally necessary mystery, actually serve a crucial psychological purpose?
Which brings us to a brilliant debate motion. This house believes that easy access to information diminishes meaningful discovery. Think about it. When you have every single route perfectly optimized on your phone and every location instantly searchable, are you actually being robbed of the very human experience of wandering? If technology totally optimizes our movement and makes sure we literally never get lost, we have to ask what exactly we're trading away in exchange for all that efficiency.
I want to pause for a second and just let this question sink in. Does perfect knowledge diminish wonder? I mean, if we never have to struggle to find our way, do we lose the psychological growth that only comes from getting lost? Wandering builds awareness. Uncertainty deepens our memory of a place. By erasing the mystery of the world with perfect digital mapping, we might just be sacrificing the kind of deep, meaningful experience that only happens when you don't know exactly where you're going.
Let's shift our narrative funnel a bit and dive into Section 3, Borders, Movement, and Morality.
This part brilliantly illustrates the stark difference between us humans and the rest of the natural world. Animals migrate out of pure instinct, right? It's biological programming driven by seasonal survival and changing ecosystems. Human migration, however, is an entirely different story. It's completely wrapped up in moral, political, and social complexities. Humans move because of war, hope, economics, curiosity, colonialism, and identity. Movement for us is never just biological. It's heavily regulated, hotly debated, and inherently tied to power and exclusion.
This leads to one of the most intense framing battles in global politics today: compassion versus security. On the affirmative side, prioritizing compassion, the argument is that universal human rights and the reality of human suffering simply must override the rigidity of national borders. It prioritizes asylum for those fleeing danger. But on the negative side, prioritizing security, the argument contends that nations absolutely must preserve their stability, sovereignty, and order.
This side prioritizes the obligations a government has to its own national citizens through controlled entry. It's a profound ethical tension regarding inclusion and sovereignty, and it's a debate that defines our modern era.
We see a similarly intense clash of perspectives when we look back at history, specifically regarding colonialism. It's a battle of exploration versus exploitation. Was exploration heroic, or was it historically destructive? Well, one perspective argues that European navigation expanded civilization, connected the globe, and pushed the boundaries of human knowledge, leaving this legacy of heroic discovery. But the opposing perspective points out that this very same exploration was not morally neutral at all. It directly enabled conquest, disease, oppression, and empire, leaving a legacy of profound disruption. We constantly have to evaluate if the romantic idea of exploration is historically justified.
When we look at historical tragedies, like the MS St. Louis, which was a ship of Jewish refugees denied entry by multiple countries, we're forced to confront a deeply philosophical challenge. This house believes that borders are fundamentally incompatible with universal human rights. We live in a world where countries frequently celebrate freedom, human rights, and globalization, yet tightly restrict refugees, asylum seekers, and undocumented migrants. This forces us to grapple with the moral contradictions of restricting human movement. Just how universal are human rights if a drawn line on a map can override them?
Now we enter the absolute deepest part of our existential funnel in Section 4, the psychology of in-between.
To really understand this, we need to look at the concept of liminality. Liminality is the psychological state of being in between places. Think of the movie The Terminal, or that weird feeling of being stranded in an airport, waiting at a border crossing, or the long, drawn-out journey of migration itself. When someone is stuck in limbo, existing somewhere between a home they've left behind and a destination they haven't reached yet, it creates intense existential instability. You're neither a citizen nor an insider, you're just caught in this holding pattern of ambiguity.
Being in these threshold spaces has a huge psychological impact. Migrants and travelers existing in these in-between zones often develop hybrid identities and divided loyalties. They experience immense cultural fluidity, sure, but also deep ambiguity and instability. These thresholds essentially force people to reinvent themselves. Their sense of belonging ceases to be tied to a specific GPS coordinate. Instead, belonging becomes something entirely psychological that they have to carry within themselves.
And we really have to be careful how we view this, because society loves to romanticize wandering. We view the open road, the ocean, and voluntary travel as these beautiful symbols of freedom, self-discovery, and reinvention. We celebrate the tourist and the backpacker. But there is a sharp, necessary contrast between this romanticized view and the harrowing reality of forced displacement. For refugees and those experiencing statelessness, movement isn't about self-discovery. It's about exile, tragic loss, and absolute necessity. One is a choice, the other is a desperate survival mechanism.
Which brings us to another incredibly striking debate motion. This house believes that movement is often mistaken for freedom. We so often equate mobility with liberation, but if you are constantly moving because you literally have nowhere to stay, is that really freedom? Or is it simply a lack of roots and true belonging? Sometimes the freedom we actually crave isn't the ability to go anywhere, but the stability and the right to finally just stay somewhere.
So the crucial point to take away from all of this is that the physical act of finding our coordinates on a map is ultimately just a metaphor. Whether we're talking about ancient wayfinders reading the stars, modern commuters blindly following an algorithm, or migrants standing at a border, humans are always trying to find their way. We are navigating across geography, yes, absolutely. But more importantly, we are navigating across identity, morality, and meaning.
I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to help you reconsider your own internal compass. As you move through the world today, whether you're using a map, wandering through the fog, or standing in the liminal space of an airport terminal, ask yourself, is the purpose of navigation merely to arrive at a destination, or is it to understand who we are along the way?